Something we often talk about on Alpaca is how identity impacts our experience of travel. As a cis white woman, it's very difficult for me to relate to airport discrimination, racial profiling, and just general airport anxiety. Because for me, transiting through airports all over the globe has been of little to no concern. But in my research into airport experiences, I've started to notice that my experience is very privileged. Today, let's find out why. Peppermint is an actress, singer, television personality, drag queen, and activist. She's known to many as the beloved runner-up on the 9th season of RuPaul's Drag Race. In 2018, Peppermint made her Broadway debut in the Go-Go's inspired musical, Head Over Heels, playing the role of Pythia. She became the first trans woman to originate a principal role on Broadway. But she had made history before this already, because Peppermint was the first transgender contestant to go on RuPaul's Drag Race who was out prior to the show airing. So today, we're going to chat with Peppermint about her experience as not only a trans woman, but a trans Black woman who travels frequently. Hi.
Hello.
It's so nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hi. I'm Peppermint.
So first of all, welcome, Miss Peppermint. Can I call you Agnes, or do you prefer I call you Peppermint?
Well, here's a little joke. I don't mind if you call me Agnes, but to be honest with you, and I really do appreciate you asking, but you should know, I generally only go by Peppermint. And that's just kind of to keep things simpler for me, you know? But Agnes is actually not any of my names.
Really?
It's on Wikipedia, and I'm aware that apparently my name is Agnes because people have told me that my name is Agnes when they meet me for the first time. But it's not actually my name. It's not on my license. It's never been on any of my birth certificates, and I've never introduced myself as Agnes to anybody. But it's the name that just follows me around. But that's okay. So please call me Peppermint.
Do you know where this name originated from?
I don't know who thought it up. It's just another alias that I don't want.
Yeah, okay. We'll call you Peppermint.
Okay.
So obviously, I would love to just get the insider scoop about RuPaul's Drag Race for the next hour, but it's a travel podcast, so I'm going to try my best to stay on brand. So we wanted to invite you onto Alpaca to tell us about your experiences traveling as a trans Black woman. And I wanted to use a term we learned from another guest of ours, Andrew. He used an identity-first framework to share with us the challenges that he faces as a disabled traveler. So could you give us an identity-first lowdown? Like explain to us the elements of your identity that impact your day-to-day life?
Yeah, the elements of my identity that impact my day-to-day life. By the way, I love your avatar when you're hangout.
Thank you.
I'd say that the number one identity that impacts my daily life and always has is my Blackness. Both from two ways. It informs kind of who I am and my approach to things, and of course my positioning on different issues and matters and subjects and different things in life, and also my relationship to my family, and then also my relationship to others, but then also of course my how I'm viewed, and it has, I think, at one point or another kind of impacted my socioeconomic positioning, at least for my family. And I remember thinking at one point in time when I was younger, and this may or may not have been correct, but from my perspective, I remember, we didn't have enough money to go to on school trips and things like that. I never went on any school trips. And I was in a lot of different like clubs and organizations like the band who would travel all the time. And so I remember thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be so much easier if I'd been born white, I remember taking karate. I was so excited when my mom, well, it was actually judo, and my mom enrolled me in judo, and I signed up, and I was really happy, and I was really doing well. I was, if I'd say, seemed to be grasping the concept a lot better than my peers at the time. But they all surpassed me, and I never left like white belt, like the lowest rank white belt, which is what you start out as, because we didn't have the money to take the test to go to the next level, because we didn't have the money. And so there was a lot of moments like that I felt like I was disadvantaged. And then the second layer of that is just the swishiness with which I walked through life. It was, I faced a lot of treatment, and that was akin to what people would say like misogyny. And even though I didn't express myself and I didn't claim womanhood at the time, all you have to do is be perceived as male, and embracing womanhood or femininity to be mistreated and kind of thrown aside. And so I was beat up and chased and teased and bullied. And then, it was so interesting as someone who was perceived as male. And as a young person, I didn't know what trans meant, or the ability to possibly change my appearance or with plastic surgery. And I certainly didn't think that I had the means to do those things. I couldn't even get a damn, to the stripe on my white belt. And so it was just so ironic that as someone, before I transitioned and kind of embraced womanhood, I was accused and kind of bullied and targeted for being a woman.
Yeah.
And, and then now that I'm a woman, I'm subjected to being targeted and accused of being a man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So those are some of the identities that I carry. Of course, my identity as an African American, which is different than an African or a Caribbean. My American lens at which I view my blackness is very different. And so there's that. And then coming back to being a trans woman is the identity in which I engage with others on most frequently, politically, of course, socially, and as in kind of, on an advocacy level, and even artistically and creatively. That's the realm in which I tend to operate in the most, because we are, as a Black trans woman, that is the identity that is also most targeted and frequently discriminated against, and also kind of left in discarded as undesirable more often than any of my other identities.
Mm-hmm. I have a background in feminist studies, gender studies, and I always tried to describe to people what intersectional feminism was by explaining like the different ways that identity impact our experience of marginalization. And I described it sort of as like you said, like layers, but also as a pyramid. So as like a white woman, I do experience a degree of marginalization, but I'm a little higher on the pyramid because of my whiteness. And I always thought that was a good way of describing it, to show people how there's really different degrees and layers to your experience of marginalization.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that whole, I'd never really heard the term intersections it used until probably like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago. And it really is the best way to describe and chart our relationship to marginalization and oppression and, the patriarchy. That's always interesting. But yeah, those are the more inescapable identities that affect my daily life, and I have learned to embrace, not that they are not worthy of being embraced, but things that I have been targeted for and teased for in the past, I've learned to kind of accept. Like, as a woman, being 6 foot tall is somewhat unusual, and as a woman with a rather deep voice, that's another kind of red flag for other people.
Yeah.
And I've had to kind of really, I'm actually recording an album right now where I'm singing, and singing is something I've been doing for a long time, and it's initially was something that I just really could not stand the sound of my voice. I think most people don't like the sound of their voices recorded when they're not used to hearing them.
Yeah.
But particularly when, as a trans woman whose ability to kind of like live in my womanness is newer to me than other women around me. Yes, 91 in Broadway. Sorry, I'm in a cab. As a woman who's, some of these things are newer to me, hearing my voice through kind of reflected back to me with other people is always really is always really interesting, and that's something I'm kind of embracing. And the more I embrace it, the less of a barrier I think it is, the less of a detractor or a weapon that people can use it against me,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So something we often talk about on this podcast is how identity impacts our experience of travel. So as a cis white woman, it's really difficult for me to relate, especially to airport discrimination, racial profiling, and even just like general airport anxiety, because I, for years, have been transiting through airports with little to no concern. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about your experience transiting through airports from an identity-first perspective.
Absolutely. I remember traveling in airports, 10, 20 years ago before my medical transition. And, just stop the car. I'll get out wherever you pull the car. Yeah, it's right here is beautiful. Thank you. Miss, and it's wow, I just got misgendered.
Oh my God.
In the taxi.
Oh
anyway,
my God.
So what I was going to say was traveling. I remember like 10 or 20 years ago traveling, and I remember traveling with some friends. We were flying to Florida. And we were traveling as a group, so we were like a group of like obviously queer people. And we got on our flight to Florida, and we were like the last ones on the flight, of course, because I guess we were late. And we're walking through, and it was like as if a record scratched, and everyone on the flight was like looking at us. We were friends on a trip, and we weren't being extremely loud or obnoxious, but it was just really interesting how people were like, stopping and staring. And I remember like stopping and, basically announcing to the whole airplane, yes, we're queer.
Yeah.
That was, I think my queerness really was kind of a way that people would target me, like socially, like just like other people, my peers, co-workers, my other students, classmates. I remember feeling from like just people that were supposed to be kind of like on my same level, they would often point out, you know, some of the ways that they were either uncomfortable with my presence or the ways that my presence, my existence was a disruption. I remember being afraid that just being kind of trans in public was going to subject me to a lot of discrimination. And while I'm susceptible to it, and it does happen, as it just did in the car, I'm surprisingly, and I think that's what my kind of relationship to the privilege that I carry as someone who was on TV, as someone who is at a particular earning level that doesn't necessarily expose me to as much discrimination as I could experience. I've been able to dodge a good amount of it. But there's a book that's called Beyond Trans, Does Gender Matter? By Heath Fogg Davis. And he goes in and talks about all of the ways that the gender binary is used. I mean, I think we all know that so many things are gendered in our society, but it's specifically in terms of people being gatekeepers and giving people access to certain spaces, public spaces, whether it's bathrooms, obviously lines at the airport in terms of like who you're going to get scanned by or get kind of patted down by if you have to go to the scanner. You know, in Philadelphia, they used to collect the bus passes, and the bus passes would be gendered with an M or an F marker on them, which is crazy. Like, what difference does it make?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of those moments, and each of those moments was an opportunity for someone who led an otherwise very typical life and existence at a humdrum job, the ability to become like this all-powerful person who could deny a trans person access to a space and even interrogate them, you know, about their bodily parts, about their genitalia in public, in front of the busload of people. And so that's only happened to me a couple times. The one time that I was traveling, I was in an airport in Russia, and this was before I had the opportunity to change over my identification documents, my passport, my ID. And so I was traveling, as I have done many times before. And in the past, I had just kind of did it on a wing and a prayer. I would travel, I have my ticket, should be good. I'm obviously the same person in my ID, even though, you know, how I'm presenting may be different. And I never really had an issue until I got to the Moscow airport in Russia. And at that point, I was on a connection, so I was in a rush, getting off the plane, running to the next gate, which is always like the other end. It might as well be in another country. And by the time I get there, the attendant she took my ID and just couldn't believe that it was me. I don't know what she could believe, because she wasn't communicating anything other than the look on her face of disbelief, which turned into this kind of disapproval. And I was, you know, basically in a position where it was clear that she was not going to let me through, which meant missing my flight and then potentially having to stay in Russia in the airport for until I could talk to someone who wanted to help. And that didn't seem like it was going to happen anytime soon. So I was in a position where I removed my wig when it was the only kind of thing that I could do within my power to show that, okay, I am the same person. Mm-hmm. And that is honestly, for me, it's almost as humiliating as actually disrobing, because you're being forced or baited into a situation where you are kind of, you're supporting the stereotype, you're supporting the conception, the misconception that trans people are perpetrators and that we're sneaking around and, you know, oh, look, it's really just a man after all of that, right?
Right, yeah.
And so, you know, I was in that position where I kind of had to concede and say, okay, yeah, you got me. This isn't my hair. And that was it was traumatic, extremely traumatic. I was in tears the rest of the flight. I'll never forget. It was always important to me to change over my documents, but I honestly wasn't able to. But then afterwards, I realized this is so important, and I just have to do it and do what I need to do. And that took about like 6 months to, have my name legally changed and get all the documents. And it's expensive, and you have to, I had to hire a lawyer. We had to go to court to get the judge to agree, and just all of this stuff. And, and then dealing with no one likes to go to the DMV. Imagine having to do it like 6 times for every single thing. So
yeah,
it was a lot, but it was worth it.
Yeah. But it just points again to like how inaccessible that process in itself is, which by proxy makes travel less accessible for people who like maybe it is not financially in their means to go and have the paperwork done.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about, identity, and especially from the people of trans experience, there's two pieces. One of them is passing privilege, where a trans person isn't necessarily read as trans, not necessarily like visually detectable, or, just when they're moving about their everyday life. And then the other is pretty privilege, which is, whether you're passable or not, you're attractive enough for us to allow you through into the women's room, into, the public place without any scrutiny,
right?
Through the airport. And so that's always been really interesting to me.
Yeah, I've heard of passing privilege, but that's a new one for me. Pretty privilege.
Yeah, I've heard. I've had this conversation with lots of my girlfriends about, pretty privilege, and I think passing privilege is the big signifier of that comes from other people. How they treat you is really going to be. It's going to inform you on your relationship to either of those privileges, but. Pretty privilege is real, especially when it's a well-known trans person whose transition is public. Then there's less passing privilege because people already know, and so they're not really passing for appearing to be cis. They're just beautiful, and so there's certain privileges that we afford to people who we think are attractive.
Yeah,
and that includes trans people.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the topic of passing privilege, in some of the research that I was doing, it was showing that TSA agents in the US haven't been educated on how to handle screening decisions when they aren't sure of a person's gender or their gender expression. So I was reading that they don't have any formal guidelines or any sensitivity training. Yeah, in one account that I read, which was written by a person who identifies as non-binary, they said that before they go into an airport, they do everything that they can to change their appearance to appear as one or the other gender because they want to avoid misgendering so badly. But then, as you mentioned, it's traumatic to have to go through that every single time you need to go through an airport. I just thought that this was like in 2019 that TSA agents haven't had any training on this just seems really absurd to me.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that is really interesting, right? And I was actually watching a video last night on the BBC done by some trans women in 1973 who were talking about just what it's like to live as a trans woman and kind of be in sort of society as a trans woman. And there's a lot of things that were different, but many of them were the same. Back then, the struggle and the focus was more on educating people on what it means to be trans and simplifying it as much as possible so that it's just, this is me and I'm a woman and that's it as a trans woman, or look, I'm a trans man and that's it, I'm a man. Nothing more to say or do. And it really doesn't challenge people to step up to the plate and kind of expand their idea much on what it means to be male or female, or what really like wrapping our mind around gender and how we use it. And so I think, you know, for a while I thought that, you know, one of the more nuanced or progressive ideas about gender was going to be kind of told through, or it would include a good understanding of who and what a trans person is today. And while I think that's true, I now think the true key, which will provide the most, for lack of a better word, balance, is a really good understanding and a respect and appreciation for folks who are non-binary or gender non-conforming. And I think that's the only time that we'll really be able to kind of release ourselves from the kind of gender prison that we've so happily locked ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, like, it's wild to me how many times you still need to explain to someone the difference between, like, gender and sex and sexuality. Like, for such a progressive, or we think that we're progressive in 2019, and yet people still don't have a basic grasp on the differences between what these things are. So yeah, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about your travel decisions and like your relationship to travel. Do you find now that you've like figured out a way to experience airports with minimal anxiety? Are there certain places that you won't travel to because it's too much stress? Yeah, just curious your thoughts.
There haven't been any. Okay, so my relationship to travel initially was kind of, I think I was kind of terrified about travel initially, not knowing sort of, I just knew that I was always the target. It wasn't until I became, I was able to, I don't want to say the word relax, but it wasn't until I was able to feel as confident as possible in my own appearance years ago, even prior to my actual medical transition, that I was able to kind of, you know, not worry too much or not like bemoan the travel. And I didn't look at it as something that was completely scary. It definitely is to some people. You know, initially I was just kind of, my approach was just like, well, let's just see what happens. And if they detain me, they detain me. I'm not a terrorist. I'm not like, I don't have any weapons other than gender. And so, you know, I should be fine. That was initially kind of my approach to everything. Then later on, once I started my medical transition and really realized that this is something that my documents is something that I'm going to have to really handle. Then I got a little bit more scared because I was worried about, what if I travel to, you know, I'm not worried about traveling to like London or, you know, not, you know, but what if I do travel to somewhere in the, like far in the East, like Eastern Europe, you know, Russia, or even the Middle East, you know, somewhere, what's going to happen? Because I remember watching a story on some trans women and trans people in, I want to say, Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure exactly, but in a particular Middle Eastern country, and there was a culture that some people would describe as extremely homophobic and dangerous for queer and trans people and women. So I remember watching a special, and they were doing a story on the trans women that were in this country. And they were talking about, you know, if you're a trans woman and you're in this country, the government will pay for your operations, your surgeries, at least your gender reassignment surgery. And I thought that was amazing at first, but then I realized this is just because they don't really know they don't want to move their marker. They don't want to make any type of paradigm shift to better understand humanity and, you know, misogyny, and they just want here's another woman, whoever they are, to just conform so that they follow the rules and step in line like all the other women that's what they would like. And this is, we know how to deal with you when we can control you as a woman rather than having to make a paradigm shift about anything else. And so if you were willing to have the complete gender reassignment surgery and pretty much check everything on their box that fulfill your approach to womanhood, then they will bless you with the honor and the gift of being an oppressed woman. And I just thought that was really interesting. And at first I thought it was, oh, how progressive is this? And then I kind of thought, oh, wait a minute. No, because what will she be able to enjoy any of the kind of freedoms or luxuries or privileges that we have in the States as progressive or as queer trans women? You know, what does that mean?
Yeah, and actually, like what you were saying about some of those countries, one thing I was reading is that it's still illegal to be gay in 71 countries around the world. And the argument is that because many people don't understand the differences between sex, gender, and sexuality, they don't understand the binary, these laws pose safety risks for basically anyone who identifies within the LGBTQ plus community. Because they're just assumed to be gay in these countries where they just don't have a strong understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to close up, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to share with us maybe a lighter experience, something fun that you've done, like a memory you have from your travels.
Yeah.
What's the best, your favorite place you've ever been to?
My favorite place that I've ever traveled to from long ago was my first trip to Dublin, Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't so much the actual travel that I was in love with, to be honest with you, but it's just being there and being in this beautiful country, being in Ireland. Even though I don't really know, but I'm not Irish. And... but for some reason, I have such a connection and affinity for the Irish, but also the Republic of Ireland, and I just think it's a beautiful place. And so I really enjoy myself every time I'm there. I have a lot of friends that live there now, and I've been able to really enjoy it. The first time I ever went, I was performing, and people were just screaming and hollering, and I mean that's probably why I liked it so much. Is the people that were at my show were just like basically doing backflips, and I was like, "This is the best place ever." That's always been great. I'm going back again to India for the second time in just a few months, and that is I only saw a very small. I only saw a couple of cities, which is like not even, not a major percentage of what I could have seen. But being able to go and travel to India was extremely, it was life-changing. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah, I've been there as well, and I'm also going to be going back this year because something about it like sucks you in. It's it's like challenging, but in a really beautiful way.
Mm-hmm. I remember being on the flight back home thinking, I can't do this ever again, because it wasn't even the flight, but it was just like, the culture, as I'm sure you know, is just so different, like with regards to things like personal space.
Yeah.
And, what I thought was really interesting is like that so many people on the flight, mostly coming back, they were changing their seats so frequently on the flight, which I thought was so interesting. Like, this is your seat. Let's sit in our seat. But no, they were like, there was a guy who was next to me who was bouncing around, sitting next to strangers, sitting next to his wife, which was on the other side of the plane, going to the back, talking to some guys. It's like a party or something. I don't understand what was going on.
I know. I noticed that exact same thing.
And there were like 10 minutes before we were landing, like the seat buckle your seatbelts up sign was on, and we were getting ready to land, which means they were closing things down and packing things up. this woman was like ringing her bell and called over the flight attendant and was like, I want to change my seat. And they were like, honey, it's over, you know?
Oh, I love it. I get what you mean, though, because there were definitely moments, especially towards the end, where I was like, I will never need to come back here. That was enough stress. And then I was home for a little bit, and I started to miss it.
Yeah, exactly the same. And then when they invited me back, I did not hesitate for 1 minute.
Final question. It might be like a little obsolete because I think that maybe the key is to address what needs to change for trans people to be safe and accepted, like on a broader spectrum, like in all areas of their lives. But what do you see as the most important steps for making travel more accessible? And what advice would you have for trans people who are maybe nervous to travel?
I think that the number one thing that would make travel more accessible to trans people, honestly, is the documents. You know, and it's not the be all end all, and it certainly is not the magic bullet, but it is a huge step in the right direction. And I know that there's a lot of people who don't have access, can't afford it, don't even have the resources or think that they have the resources. And so I would like to name one resource. It's the National Center for Trans Equality and the Transgender Law, Transgender Till Death, Transgender Legal Defense Fund, I think. And so these two websites, these two organizations were very instrumental in me being able to navigate the almost unnavigatable world of changing your documents. You know, in many states, there is a very specific, yet not announced, but very specific order in which you have to change your documents. Like if you get your license before your social security card, then they won't do, you know, different things that I don't remember. And so having access to documents, and I think being able to change those over in a more seamless way is important. Hopefully, one of the barriers, in many states, is birth certificates. Some states allow folks to change the gender marker on their birth certificate. Some don't, and so that is sort of the next frontier, I think, in terms of documents and travel. I think one of the things, a lot of the tools are already out there, though, for some people. Again, unfortunately, what we're talking about here is the best way around the ignorance and the discrimination or the bigotry, you know, because you can't force everyone to be educated all at once. And even when you do educate them all at once, you can't force them to kind of make that change in their belief system. Yeah. And so the way around that, unfortunately, right now is paying for convenience. And so things like TSA PreCheck, we're talking about air travel, things like TSA PreCheck and Global Entry, and other similar programs in other countries. Sentry is one. There's a few others in other countries, in Canada and in Europe and everything. Paying for those programs will allow you to sign up and kind of skip the line and bypass having to go through the body scanner, the dreaded body scanner, which is a nightmare because I can't get through the body scanner because I'm just, whatever the algorithm is, I don't pass it. Yeah. And so that's kind of what I would say in terms of travel. Until people really do sort of make that paradigm shift and kind of understand more about gender and understanding that gender itself is not binary. And so I think that's really the ultimate goal. But in the meantime, get yourself TSA PreCheck and get your documents ready and updated so we can go on a vacation.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, Peppermint.
Absolutely. I'm so sorry for the New York City noise in the background. Hopefully your listeners will think of it as maybe I'm bringing them to New York with me.
Yes, it's very like atmospheric. I love it. All right. Have a great evening. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. did I?
Killed it.
It was such a pleasure to chat with Peppermint. She has so much insight into the experience of trans people, not only in travel, but in their lived everyday experiences. If you want to find out more about Peppermint, go to one of her shows, listen to her podcast, or watch her on RuPaul, go to peppermintonline.com. You can also find her on Twitter at peppermint247. This podcast is produced by Katie Lohr and written and hosted by me, Erin Hines. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at alpacamybagspod. You can also join our Facebook group, Alpaca Your Bags. We have lots of fun on there. We share really interesting articles, and we just have great conversations about travel, sustainability, and a whole plethora of issues. You can email us at hello@alpacamybags.ca, and you can leave a review. Please leave us a review. We love reading them. And in the future, if you leave a really good one, we might share it with you live on the podcast. Tune in every other Wednesday for more episodes. I hope y'all get to alpaca your bag soon. Until next time.